In a world where gods walk among men and the fate of empires is decided by a single spark, there lies a city whose very name would echo through eternity, Troy. What began as the reckless pursuit of love turned into a decade-long war that tested the might of the ancient world. As the Greeks and Trojans clashed, heroes rose and fell, gods took sides, and a cunning plan would forever change the course of history. This is the epic story of the Siege of Troy, where the line between myth and reality blurs, and every moment is charged with destiny. The origins of the Trojan War begin with a forbidden romance. According to legend, the war was set into motion when Paris, a prince of Troy, abducted Helen, the queen of Sparta. Helen was considered the most beautiful woman in the world, and her abduction enraged her husband, King Menelaus. But this was no ordinary act of kidnapping. It was said to have been inspired by the gods themselves. Paris had been promised Helen by Aphrodite, the goddess of love, after he judged her the fairest in a contest among the goddesses. Aphrodite's intervention, however, came at a terrible price, as this one decision would bring an entire civilization to its knees. Furious over his wife's abduction, Menelaus called upon his brother Agamemnon, the powerful king of Mycenae, to help him retrieve Helen and punish the Trojans. Agamemnon saw an opportunity not just for justice, but for conquest. Soon, the greatest Greek leaders of the time gathered under his command, forming an alliance that would launch a massive military expedition to Troy. Among the warriors were legendary heroes like Achilles, the invincible demigod, Odysseus, the cunning king of Ithaca, and Ajax, the towering giant of strength. These men represented the best of Greece, and they set sail across the Aegean Sea with a fleet of 1,000 ships, determined to lay siege to Troy and reclaim Helen. When the Greeks arrived at the walls of Troy, they were met with a formidable opponent. Troy was not just any city. It was a bastion of wealth and power, protected by impenetrable walls, said to have been built by the gods themselves. King Priam ruled over Troy, and alongside him were his sons, Hector, a warrior of unmatched honor and skill, and Paris, whose love for Helen had sparked the conflict. The Trojans, proud and determined to defend their home, braced themselves for what would become one of the longest and bloodiest sieges in history. For 10 long years, the Greeks and Trojans fought a brutal war. The battlefield was littered with the bodies of countless soldiers as both sides clashed in ferocious combat. At the heart of the Greek army was Achilles, whose unparalleled prowess in battle made him both feared and revered. His rage was legendary, but so was his vulnerability, his heel, the only part of him that was not protected by the divine. Achilles' exploits on the battlefield became the stuff of legend as he slaughtered Trojan after Trojan, seemingly unstoppable in his quest for glory. But the war was not just fought by mortal men. The gods themselves took sides in the conflict, with Zeus, Hera, Athena, Apollo, and others intervening in the fates of the warriors below. These divine beings manipulated events, sometimes aiding their favored heroes, other times sowing chaos to tip the balance of power. Troy became a chessboard for the gods, and the lives of men were their pawns. Despite the Greeks' best efforts, Troy's walls held strong. The Greeks faced devastating losses, and morale began to wane. Achilles, in a fit of rage, withdrew from the fighting after a quarrel with Agamemnon, causing the Greeks to falter without their mightiest warrior. This moment of weakness emboldened the Trojans, and Hector, the prince of Troy, led a daring counterattack that pushed the Greeks back to their ships. Hector's bravery and leadership made him a symbol of hope for the Trojans, and his exploits on the battlefield earned him the respect of friend and foe alike. But the tides of war would shift once again. After the death of his close friend Patroclus, who had donned Achilles' armor in a desperate attempt to rally the Greek forces, Achilles' fury knew no bounds. He returned to the battlefield with vengeance in his heart, seeking out Hector for a final, fateful duel. The two greatest warriors of their time faced off, and in a moment of sheer brutality, Achilles struck down Hector, dragging his lifeless body behind his chariot in a display of savage triumph. Hector's death was a devastating blow to Troy, and with their greatest protector gone, the Trojans' fate seemed all but sealed. However, despite their losses, the Trojans still held out behind their mighty walls. It became clear to the Greeks that brute force alone would not win the war. This is where the legendary cunning of Odysseus came into play. The Greeks devised a brilliant and deceitful plan, the construction of the famous Trojan horse. This enormous wooden horse, hollow on the inside, was presented as a gift to the Trojans, a supposed offering of surrender. Believing the war was finally over, the Trojans brought the horse within their city walls, celebrating what they thought was their victory. But under the cover of night, while the Trojans slept, Greek soldiers hidden inside the horse crept out and opened the gates of Troy. The entire Greek army, which had pretended to sail away and retreat, returned under the cover of darkness and flooded into the city. The Trojans were caught completely off guard, and what followed was a night of horrific slaughter. Troy, the city that had withstood a decade-long siege, was finally breached. Its buildings were set aflame, its people massacred, and its treasures plundered. In one final catastrophic blow, the Greeks had taken the city they had fought so long to conquer. The fall of Troy was a moment of profound tragedy, not just for the Trojans, but for the Greeks as well. Though they had won the war, it had come at a great cost. Many of the greatest Greek heroes would not survive to see their homeland again. Achilles, the mightiest of them all, was struck down by an arrow to his heel, fulfilling the prophecy of his death. King Priam was brutally murdered, and Queen Hecuba was taken captive, her fate sealed in the hands of the victors. Even Helen, the woman whose beauty had sparked the war, was returned to Greece, though her legacy would forever be stained by the bloodshed that followed her abduction. The siege of Troy was not just a battle for a city, but a battle for the ages. It was a clash of civilizations, a war of gods and men, and a story that would be told for millennia. The epic poem, the Iliad, attributed to the ancient poet Homer, immortalized the events of the Trojan War, ensuring that the tale of Troy would never be forgotten. The themes of love, honor, betrayal, and revenge that run through the story resonate just as powerfully today as they did in the ancient world.